I've got quite a lot of material. When I started looking into this subject, I didn't realize quite how deep the rabbit hole went. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to cram everything about it in, but I'm going to try pretty hard. So I'm Adam Retter. I'm from Evolve Binary. It's a little bit of information about us, but let's get on with the talk. Yes, we've got a lot to take in. So what is packaging? It's turns out it's pretty loosely defined. But what I'm here to talk about specifically is the packaging of software code and also the packaging of data and why we might want to do that. And the idea of packaging is that you take these things and you encapsulate them into some sort of container. Okay, so why do we need packages? Simply put, most modern software is built out of components, and the more modular software becomes, which seems to be the trend, probably rightly so, the more dependencies your software has on other components. At last count, EXPath, for example, which is a Java application, has some 317 libraries that it depends on. I don't even know what they all are anymore, but needless to say, there's a lot of them. And when we distribute EXPath, we need to wrap that thing up into some sort of package rather than sending people thousands and thousands of individual files, which are inside these software libraries. So alongside that, in the XML world, certainly, a lot of the applications I work with, my customers have data sets that are very particular. They might be open corpuses or they might be proprietary data. But anyway, they need to move these data sets around easily and be able to exchange them. So software packaging for data sets is also a concern of mine. Okay. Whilst doing the research for this, I found out that the sort of good principles for this were actually set out back in the 1970s, as one might expect, when there was a big focus on quality software engineering. And these are 3 rules that I pulled at random. Well, not entirely at random, but from a book on the subject of designing software. And I feel that they're very, very relevant to software packaging and something that we should use as guiding principles for when we're designing software packaging systems. Basically, they say that the packages should be completely isolated from the rest of the system. They should be testable, and they should have a clearly defined interface so we know what these packages do. Okay. Something that I've put together here is often I found that when people think about packaging, they are thinking about a file on a computer that contains a bunch of other files, i.e. the package itself. There is a lot more to the domain than that. Packaging is actually an ecosystem of many different things that have to collaborate together to be able to have a working system. So as well as the package itself, we need to think about consumption of the package. So how do we find these packages? And once we found them, how do we obtain them? We can't find and consume packages. We're not going to get very far within a packaging system. In terms of integration, we need these things to work with the tools that we're used to. So if I have a software package that contains XSLT libraries, how does, say, Saxon perhaps know how to work with that software package? If I can't integrate with my tooling, my package isn't very useful to me. We need to think about storage as well. So if we have, for example, in the case of EXPath, some 300 libraries, where do we keep these on our computer and how do we organize them? And what happens when we have multiple versions of those libraries? Do they cooperate with each other, or can we only have a single version of these libraries? Assuming that I can consume and use packages for my own benefit, what happens when I want to build a package of my own? And perhaps I want to send this somewhere and publish it for others to use. So we need tooling, possibly, or at least knowledge about how to build a package, because that may not be a straightforward exercise. In terms of transportation, well, depending on what the thing is, you might be able to send it to some web server or email it, or who knows. And the sharing aspects, where do you share these packages? So if I've created a library for, let's say functex. Are people familiar with functex? It's an XSLT and XQuery basic library. Has a lot of very useful functions. If I create a package for that, how do I share it with other people so they don't have to figure out how to get this thing and use it? So there's quite a lot to think about in the packaging ecosystem. And I think this forms a framework for talking about and measuring other packaging systems and our own approach to packaging to see whether it measures up to what we need. So this is sort of key to the rest of my work, really. Okay. So the package itself. There's many things that we would like a package to have, but fundamentally, it needs to be well standardized and documented. And historically, this hasn't always been the case in the XML community. In terms of integration, sorry, just find my place. I think I mentioned this already. How does my XSLT processor consume my package? Or more, perhaps from my perspective, slightly more complicated, if I have an XML database, how do I get my packages in and out of my XML database? And how does my database become package aware? And does it need to? Perhaps it doesn't. So building packages, this is something that historically has been quite hard in the ExistDB domain, where we work with packages quite frequently. We have lots of different approaches to doing this. None of them are documented, and we don't have particularly good tooling around it. There's the ability to create a software package yourself if the package is perhaps a zip file or a tar file, using standard Unix or Windows tools. But when these things become more complicated and have explicit metadata that has to be part of the package, that tooling falls down if you have to start typing out XML by hand and embedding it into some sort of file structure. So for a good user experience, we need to make sure that there are good tools for working with packages. Transportation and publishing. The ideal for this really is that you want the ability to have multiple repositories or registries on the internet or in your own private networks where you can transport your packages to and have them published there. These form basically an index which allows you later to consume the packages, so you can search and find the packages. You would be surprised perhaps how many packaging standards don't actually think about where the packages are going to end up or how people are going to find them. That's really quite important. If you can't find the thing, that's not there, is it? So this slide quite aptly describes how I feel about the packaging that we have in the XML world at the moment. It's not great. And I think there's one group that have been working sort of incidentally rather than intentionally over the years to improve this, which is probably the ExistDB group. So our developers put quite a lot of effort on that community project into packaging and trying to improve it. However, that's not perfect either. So in the XML world, the main thing that we have at the moment is called the EXPath packaging system. It was a candidate module published on the EXPath website. So I think Peter asked me to explain the difference between XPath and EXPath. EXPath is just a place, or was envisaged, I should say, as a place to collect extensions and proposals for extending any XPath-derived language, so XSLT, XQuery, XForms, and XPath itself. It's kind of fallen into disrepair, really, to be fair. But it's still useful as a name to refer to things that extend XPath, I think. It's not all bad. So it's good that we have a standard that we can point at and look at. And obviously, people have put some thought into this. So I don't want to be too hard on it. It's also of its time. This was published back in 2012, and the world and ideas around software packaging has moved on significantly since then. And perhaps our expectations have risen. So, okay. So the good bits. There are good bits. It gives us a starting point, and it has some sensible defaults around metadata and versioning. Also, we've been using this for, well, since 2012 in the EXPath project. So we're very familiar with where the pain points are, which gives us a jumping off point for improving things. So from my perspective, it's missing a lot of things. So I talked about this framework that I've kind of established in my mind anyway, for how to think about a packaging ecosystem. So it has nothing defined for consumption, building, transportation, or publication. It really only defines the package format itself. It does talk about on-disk storage, but that part has a big label on it saying it's deprecated, which is strange because it's the first version of the standard that I know of, but it was deprecated from the start, it seems. And then there's a few specific warty bits, which I'm not going to dwell on, but definitely we would want to see improved or revised in the future. So who's actually using this packaging system standard from the EXPath project? There was a prototype built for both Marklogic and Saxon. They appear not to have left the prototype stage or being developed any further. I checked yesterday to be certain of this. BaseX has support for it. I don't know if people in the BaseX community are using these packages. Does anybody here know that? No? Okay. Well, I'm sure not everybody from BaseX is here, but they may be using it. They certainly have it documented, which is nice. We've been using it for a long time in the EXPath project for software packages, both for code, Xquery code predominantly, but also XSLT and Java, and also for data. We had to, and I say we very intentionally because various developers in the EXPath project have worked on it over time where needed. It's grown organically, but we've added extensions to it to achieve the things that we need it to do, basically. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a consensus on what this is that it needs to do exactly. And none of the extensions are documented. So it really is, apologies for the typo there, it really is about sort of trying it and seeing if you can get it working more than a concerted effort to standardize it in an improved way. Okay. And my experience of using this in EXPath is literally pain. Every time I use it, there's something about it that doesn't work, and I end up debugging the Java code behind it to work out what's going on. It's not, in my opinion, in a good place, but I would like to see that improved, and I'm probably partly to blame for that, so throw things at me if you wish. So where do we go from here? That's interesting, right? So we know that we have EXPath packaging today. I've set out what I think is a framework for what a modern packaging ecosystem should contain. The bullet points in blue, so consumption, integration, storage, building, transportation, publication, all of those things need to be considered to produce a full working packaging system. I feel that they should be considered, they can't be all considered in isolation, but they should be separate specifications perhaps that relate to each other. I think if you try to create one giant specification to tackle this, it will never get completed. This thing needs to be attempted in small chunks, perhaps. Based on this idea that there is, sorry, no, okay. Based on this idea that it is a complex domain, the more I've looked into this, there's so much to think about. Could we fix it, or do we have to throw out the version 1 of the standard and build something else? I'm not sure, but either way, that sounds like a huge amount of work. The EXPath project is predominantly volunteer-based, and we ourselves wouldn't have the resources necessary to undertake that huge amount of work. I'm not proposing either that this should just be an EXPath project. I'd like to see this be a community project in the XML world. So under the EXPath banner, if you like, or any other appropriate label. there's certainly a lot that would have to be thought about. So whilst trying to avoid giving myself a huge amount of work, I went away and had to think about this. Does anybody know what this bird is? Bowerbird. It's not a bowerbird. Who said that? Yes, sir. It is a cuckoo. It is not a Eurasian cuckoo, which is sad because that's the one I needed a picture of. This is, I believe, a North American yellow-billed cuckoo. And what are cuckoos famous for? Laying eggs in others' nests, yes. And the Eurasian cuckoo does this a lot. The North American yellow-billed cuckoo only does it occasionally. So this bird occasionally does what we need, but the point is there. So this is a cuckoo. So what would happen if our eggs looked like someone else's eggs? And we put those eggs in somebody else's nest. Would they then look after them for us? This sounds like a great plan because it's less work for me or you or anybody else that gets involved in this. And I'm a big fan of that idea. So I started looking around at existing mature packaging systems that are not from the XML world to see, and initially when I was going to give a talk in Berlin last week, I called it perverting existing packaging systems, but maybe that's not the right thing to say. Cuckooing existing packaging systems is perhaps a more appropriate term. So there's lots of packaging systems out there. Some of them I just discounted because they were too small or too niche or not well established, shall we say. And this is the short list of ones that I then spent a great deal of time looking into in detail to understand whether we could reuse them. The first, some of you have probably heard of some of these. The first three, RPM, Deb, Homebrew. If you've ever worked with a Linux or Mac system and installed packages, you've probably experienced those, whether you're aware of it or not. They're really good, but they're very much designed for installing system software. So when I looked at repurposing them, it became too much of an exercise of trying to fit a round peg in a square hole or vice versa. However, they have something called libsolve, which is really interesting. So it's a very advanced library for resolving dependencies, because actually resolving software dependencies of packages is incredibly hard to do accurately and quickly, most importantly. You can do it really slowly, but people tend to go home. So anyway, I digress. So some of these were language specific, and they explicitly stated in their documentation and standards that they're language specific, which doesn't really lend itself well to us trying to use them for other languages. So NPM, which doesn't stand for Node Package Manager. I think that's the acronym, is actually NPM does not stand for Node Package Manager. Ruby Gems and pip, they were very language specific. They also, in fact, all three of those suffer somewhat from the problem that there is only really one repository for keeping this software in. They all have the facility for there being multiple repositories out there that you can potentially have under different ownership and control. But in practice, there aren't any. There is one giant central repository. And when that repository has a problem, you have a problem. And what I have learned from the ExistDB project, which has a software repository for keeping EXPath packages in, is don't have one repository that has a problem. Because unfortunately, the ExistDB repository probably goes offline between every 1 or 2 days for 20 minutes here and there. And during that time, I can't build ExistDB, because when you build ExistDB, it tries to download some packages. So you need some sort of solution that has multiple repositories or mirrors of repositories that you can rely on. Or that's my perspective, I should say. So from this list, there were two that really stood out as possible to cuckoo. I'm going to use that as a verb, yep. So Maven, which is interesting because it takes a build approach first. So they're always thinking about how you build things. Whereas some of these other ones take a package first approach. So they're thinking about the artifacts that you're going to create. Whereas Maven's interested in how you build stuff. And then the fact that you're creating a package is kind of is a consequence of the build. And Conda. So Conda actually comes, anyone here familiar with Conda? No? Okay. So Conda comes from the Python ecosystem. And it is incredible, is all I will say. I've spent like a week learning Conda and playing around with it and reading all the specs in the code. Sorry, I've jumped ahead a bit. Basically, there are two contenders, in my opinion, of packaging systems that we could cuckoo for EXPath packages. Maven is one of them, and Conda is the other. Conda is impressive. They really have everything that I can think of, and they have it documented, and they have support channels for discussing it, and they have a whole thing called Conda Forge for building, well, that should say Conda, sorry, little typo there. Conda Forge, not Coda Forge. They have a whole CI infrastructure and everything you can possibly imagine for building packages and getting them published to the web. So if you could cuckoo EXPath packages into the Conda system, they will provide the software repositories, they will provide the build infrastructure, they also provide the tooling for consuming these packages. So it ticks all the boxes. Maven also has all of this, but it's laid out in a slightly different way. But both of these are potential contenders for a replacement, perhaps, for what we have for EXPath packaging in some way. So, future work. Basically, the question is, in practice, can I get XML packages, some form of XML packages, that is, maybe not the packaging standard we have now, but a revision to that, riding atop of Maven and or Conda. And if I can do that, do I have something that's interoperable? Can I take packages from either place and use them and combine them together? That would be really interesting. So if I could do that, perhaps an EXPath packaging standard version 2 becomes a meta kind of standard, really, that sits above other implementations, which means I don't have to build any infrastructure. I just have to write down some words on paper and tell people how to use it. Okay, so that's where I'm at. There's obviously a lot of work to do in future, and some of this I have started playing with already. So I have some packages that I built with Conda. So I have a Saxon package, I have a functex package, and things like that. But there's a lot more to do there. So questions, please.
No questions. Yes, there is a question. And two, I see Eric here.
Hi, Adam. Very interesting. Are you thinking of, I don't know, establishing another standardization group or something for this?
Ultimately, probably is the answer. What I would like to do before that point, perhaps, is carry on with a little bit of experimentation. And I welcome other people to experiment as well. If you go and find another packaging system that you think is interesting and you experiment with it and it looks promising, let me know. I think before starting a standards group, I'd want a clear idea of what we want to establish in that group. At the moment, it's all a bit hand-wavy and uncertain. And I think if we've got a group of people together and the outcomes weren't clearly defined, that could mean that we don't get any outcomes. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking about Christian Grun, but he's occupied in the QD4 community group. He's in base X.
Yeah. Sorry, I was actually asking Peter. Not Peter, Eric. You are Peter. Apologies. But it's nice to hear that as well, Peter.
Well, I was currently not thinking of anything, but I know you probably have to get some words down on paper to describe what the standard is. And there will be maybe parts that you can just copy from Conda or just say or point to Conda, but there will still be parts that you still have to write.
Absolutely.
I mean, you have metadata files and package structures and blah, blah, those kinds of things.
Yes.
So somebody has to do that.
I hear you're quite a good technical writer.
It's always better to think with more people than just.
Yes, this is by no means something that I could achieve by myself. And yeah, all help would be welcome if you are volunteering your technical writing skills.
O'Neill Delprat from Saxonica. Thank you, Adam. I enjoyed your talk. It's interesting. And yeah, I agree with you in terms of Maven has been, and Conda probably been two choice I would have picked as well. Just a thought though on servlets. I know it's sort of, I don't think it's Florian has continued with it, but I don't know if you've looked at it in terms of the EXPath packages. There is something that has is this XAW, I think it's called, where it's where he zips it up and then he puts it into a is it servlet? Yeah. So I don't know if you've looked at servlets at all.
I have looked at servlets, yeah, but not in detail for some time. So I am aware that there is some tooling, and it was mentioned briefly in one of the slides, that comes with the community standard. And I think there's a utility called xrepo or something like this that will take a bunch of files in a folder with some metadata files, compile it into a ZAR file, basically zip it up, and deploy it into a repository or a web application server. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. Yeah, I can't comment too much on that. I think it has some of the problems that the rest of the standard has. I guess what you're asking is, would we still be able to do things like that in the future? Is that what you're on? Yes, if people want that and they get involved and they tell me that that's needed, I mean, there's no point me designing a standard just for myself. I mean, there is, of course, but you know, yeah, we would need to solicit input from the whole community about what they need to package, I suppose. Thank you.
So Alan Painter, HSBC. Just I was curious if you thought about the plumbing for things like XSLT modules, which was introduced in XSLT3. So essentially, from the modules, we have to declare what modules we're going to be incorporating. So we need to have a synchronization between that and also the dependencies that would come from something like Maven or from Conduit.
Yeah, the integration question is quite tricky, not just because of XSLT modules, which definitely add an extra dimension, but you know, any xquery libraries that you have or XSLT style sheets that need to be included perhaps into other style sheets, you need some mechanism for locating those. The processor needs to be able to find them and know what they are and the interfaces that they export. In EXPath at the moment, there's something called components in the metadata spec, and you basically list out the URI of the thing that you want, and then the location, the file location of where it is. And it tells the processor, hey, look, if somebody says import this URI, this is where you can find the actual file for it. I think that was good at the time. I think we can do better. So yeah.
There's another question from Zoom. So Norm, if you can unmute yourself.
I believe I am unmuted. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can. Fabulous. Thank you, Adam. Very, very timely. And I think you're absolutely right. This is something that the community needs to get behind and do. So thank you for taking the time to present this. Thank you for beginning the hard work, and sign me up to help you. I would definitely like to see this work come to fruition and be able to have interoperability for XPath applications and XML applications across implementations and packages, et cetera. So yes.
Matt Patterson, also from Saxonica. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've also had some interesting experiences with servlets, which I would not necessarily choose to repeat. But I came to this from being a maintainer of several Ruby gems, so using the Ruby packaging system, and trying to use XSLT modules and deciding that I really rather not, for a bunch of reasons related to discovery and exactly the kinds of things you've been raising. But the thing that I think is kind of really aggravatingly critical, because it's a real pain, is that actually if there's more than one place to find things, it's quite hard to find things. And the big strength of PyPy, Ruby gems, and one of the reasons those things took off was that there was only one place to look. So you put stuff there, or you might as well not put it anywhere, which means that everything got put in the right place and could be found. But that's a huge, and I know from talking to the people in the Ruby community and from listening to things, actually the financial burden on the community of maintaining the Ruby gems repository is huge, genuinely huge, and is maintained off the back of donations of kind of cloud infrastructure and salaries for engineers, and that's a huge ask. So the cuckooing on top of something else is clearly, like, if we can't do that, then we have a potentially a serious problem. But also, like, what happens if someone decides that we can't put things that aren't whatever there? And Conda sounds really interesting. I hadn't come across this before, but I guess what I'm saying is,
what if we get caught?
Hallelujah. I would be interested in helping, particularly if Norm lets me.
Thank you. I think they're all valid points. So yeah, the strength of having a central repository is that you know where to find stuff. There are also downsides to that, of course. There is the option of having repositories and registries, so a central registry, but actually distributed repositories, and perhaps that's a better model. In terms of what happens when we get caught putting our eggs in someone else's nest, actually, so both the Maven project and the Conda project, they allowed us. So that's also why they're good choices. And in terms of infrastructure costs, yeah, it's their problem, not mine. I hope. So thanks, Matt.